Hi there folks, and warm greetings from a very cold United Kingdom this morning with a very brisk dog walk this morning, I can tell you. Sub-zero temperatures. I think it's gone up a bit now, the sun's come up, but yeah, it's very cold today. But just before I go on, I just want to say to those of you in Southern California, around the Los Angeles area, I hope you're all safe, and my heart goes out to you. Yeah, for those of you that are affected by the wildfires there, then please know that many of us are thinking of you. So today is something I've been looking forward to for ages, and I'm going to go through the books that I am hoping to read this year. I say hoping because last year I did a similar list, and I definitely did not read all the books that I listed, and I also read some books that weren't listed. But I am hoping this time to get it more accurate. I should explain the way I keep my to be read books. You might find this a little bit strange. But when I receive or buy a book, I look to see what kind of season it's set in, if it's set in any particular season or month. And I like to read my books in a seasonal way. So I like to read wintry books in winter and summery books in summer. So I put them in order in my to be read shelves so that I can read them throughout the months properly. And that's just me. That's just the way I like to do things for some reason. I don't know. We're all different. Last year I managed to read, I think it was 20 books. I know that's not a lot for some. There are 1 to 2 novels per month. 20 books is pretty good for me. So I shall try and keep it to around about that, maybe a little bit more. We will see. So last year I made the mistake of just picking out the books that I hoped I'd be reading, but I'm going to be a little bit more logical about which books I'm probably going to be reading this year. And I haven't pre-planned this, so I should be picking them out of my bookshelf as I go along. So it'll be a bit of a magical mystery tour. So let's get started, and I'm going to start with the book I've already started reading. And talking about magic and mystery, that's a really good segue into this book, Advent, which is what I've been reading. I started reading it in December. You can see it's very, very wintry. I love that cover with the windows through onto that moonlit night. I'm going to be reviewing this book hopefully next week. It's really extraordinary. I have found it really difficult to put down at times. The main character is a 15-year-old boy, but there's also kind of dual timeline thing with flashbacks back to the 16th century and a kind of Faustian themed storyline there. It is an extraordinary book. It's really difficult to talk about it, actually. The boy Gavin, who has always been able to see this woman who kind of appears to him from time to time, who he thought was real until a few years ago when his parents started thinking there was something wrong with him or that he was lying. And he realises that no one else sees her. And it kind of goes on from there. And it's extraordinary. Most of the time as you're reading, you're thinking, what's going on? What's going on? What's going on? And you just want to keep turning the pages. So I'm looking forward to giving you my review of this book because, as I say, I have found it very difficult to put down. It's a brilliant wintry or even Halloween read because it is quite scary in parts. Now, I think the next book after that is going to be a reread. When I was in Hay on Wye last year, I picked up one of the C.S. Lewis science fiction novels, That Hideous Strength, and then realised, of course, it was the third in his trilogy. And I'd already read the first one, but it was such a long time ago that I've decided to reread the whole trilogy. And I also need to buy the second one. So I am going to be reading Out of the Silent Planet by C.S. Lewis. And as I say, I have read this before. I really enjoyed it. It was the first time, I think, that I'd read any C.S. Lewis books apart from his Narnia, the Chronicles of Narnia books as a child. So I was delighted in my 20s to discover that he'd written several adult books as well. And I think one of my other ones, favourites, was The Screwtape Letters. But this is a really interesting novel about a man who gets taken from Earth to another planet, and it says on the back, man, arrogant yet fearful, stands in the presence of the godlike creatures who populate the universe, is judged and found wanting. So I'd be looking forward to reviewing that, and of course at some point the rest of the trilogy. Those of you who are waiting to see Tilly, let's just see how fast she can arrive from downstairs. Tilly, come! Come. Pretty quickly. Well trained, well done. Well, it's a good girl. So here she is, all waiting for her lunchtime treat, aren't you? So that'll keep you going for a bit. Now, I think probably in February, I'm going to read this, Elly, Griffiths, The Stone Circle. Now, a lot of you have told me that this is part of a series. I'm really bad at knowing, you know, what books are in a series or trilogies, etc. I do tend to pick books up that I just like the look of, and then find out that I should really read the other books first. But I'm going to read this anyway, because if I really like it, I will be buying the others. And a lot of you have told me that these are really, really good. So yes, I'm going to read this, and then I will probably be looking for her other Dr. Ruth Galloway mysteries. I'm very much looking forward to that. As you've told me, it's pretty good. And of course, if you know my brother's channel, the Prehistory Guys, you'll know that he is very, very much into ancient sites, stone circles, etc. And I always have been too, which is why I picked this up. And it has really good reviews, including one from Kate Moss, one of my favourite authors, who says Galloway is one of the most engaging characters in modern crime fiction. So great, looking forward to that one. This one, I think probably I have set to read in around about March time. It's called The Visible World by Mark Slouka, or Slouka, not quite sure how you pronounce his name. I don't know much about this or the writer. I think this was one of my mother's books that I picked up and put into my TBR. It's a wartime story, so definitely one of my mother's. My mother very often bought novels set in World War II, obviously because she went through that herself, and this is basically a romance. He's an American writer, and from the back I can tell you some of the premise. As a boy growing up in New York, his parents' memories of their Czech homeland seem to belong to another world as distant and unreal as the fairy tales his father tells him. It is only as an adult, when he makes his own journey to Prague, that he is finally able to piece together the truth of his parents' past, what they did, who his mother loved, and why they were never able to forget. And a review says it's an atmospheric mix of adventure, mystery and romance, as well as a nuanced tale of one family coping with the nightmare of history. The sheer beauty of Mark Slouka's prose will draw comparisons to The English Patient. Probably another reason why Mum picked it up, because she loved The English Patient. And the Sunday Telegraph says the novel skillfully conveys the irony of wartime love stories and ends with plot twists that ring out pure romance. And Oprah says this is lush, luminous fiction. So it sounds pretty good. Probably not one that I would have bought for myself. It sounds very romantic. I'm not particularly into romance, but I'm always open to books that just sort of drop into my lap, as it were. So I will be looking forward to reading this and giving you my review sometime around March. Again in March, I think, there is another wartime-based novel, and also, I think, a dual timeline from an author that I have read before and really enjoyed. She sort of in a similar vein of Kate Morton. She writes dual and multi-timeline novels, and this is A Week in Paris by Rachel Hore. And I have read of hers. I have read The Dream House. I think I've read A Place of Secrets, and possibly A Gathering Storm as well, to check. But yeah, she's a great writer. I think, again, as my mother and I both enjoyed Rachel Hore, and I think this is one she picked up as well. Again, it's a wartime one my mother would have loved, and it's set in Paris, which also Mum loves. So definitely one that I think she's picked up, but I so far have not read. So I'm looking forward to this one. And the premise, the streets of Paris hide a dark past. September 1937, Kitty Travers enrolls at the Conservatoire on the banks of the Seine to pursue her dream of becoming a concert pianist. But then war breaks out and the City of Light falls into shadow. And then we have this coming more up to date, nearly 25 years later, Faye Knox, a talented young violinist, visits Paris on tour with her orchestra. She barely knows the city, so why does it feel so familiar? Soon touches of memory become something stronger, and she realises her connection with these streets runs deeper than she ever expected. I love stories like that. So that, and it the kind of thing I like to write myself, connecting the present with the past. Judy Finnegan, who she and her husband, quite well known in the UK, used to do a book club thing on television. She says, a tour de force, Rachel's Paris is rich, romantic, exotic and mysterious. So one of those books where probably if you know Paris, you're going to enjoy it even more. And my mother and I had a holiday in Paris many years ago. And she went there again with my father. Definitely that's one that's going to bring back memories of Paris too. So lovely. Looking forward to that one. And in April, I will be reading the final novel in Philippa Gregory's trilogy, and it's Dawnlands. Can't wait to read this, having read the first two, obviously, and you can see my reviews of those first two books as well. And I've kept this one to read in spring because it is set in spring and it's got a spring-like look, hasn't it, on the front cover. Really love the covers of this whole trilogy. They're just so well designed. So in this one we see Eleanor's brother Ned Ferryman returning from America, where we saw him in the second part of the trilogy, and he returns to join the Duke of Monmouth's uprising against the Catholic King James. So the politics of the period has always been the backdrop to these novels. Meanwhile, Queen Mary summons her friend Livia, who we met in the second one, to a terrified court, and recklessly Livia drags her son Matthew and his foster mothers Eleanor and Alice into a plot to save the Queen from Monmouth's invasion. So this looks, again, very exciting, and I'm sure that it will have a very gripping and dramatic ending, as Philippa Gregory's books usually do. So this is one I'm really looking forward to, and finally closing the chapter on this incredible family saga. So yeah, so look forward to spring to read that one. And next for my spring reading is a book that I had intended to read last year, and it was on my last year TBR list, but didn't get round to it. And it's Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine by Gail Honeyman. Now, my best friend recommended this book to me, so I picked it up as when I came across a copy. Some of you have said to me that this book is a little bit harrowing in a way, but it's also been described as life-affirming and funny. So I am looking forward to see how I feel about this book. It was the winner of the British Book Awards, Book of the Year, so it's got very, very good reviews. The Sunday Express is hugely original, a funny and sad tale of a survivor who tackles the challenges of emotional reconnection with grave courage. Unmissable. So the premise is Eleanor Oliphant leads a simple life. She wears the same clothes to work every day, eats the same meal deal for lunch every day, and buys the same 2 bottles of vodka to drink every weekend. Eleanor Oliphant is happy. Nothing is missing from her carefully timetabled existence, except sometimes everything. I just love that premise, and I really love books that deal with psychology and just, you know, unique human beings and people finding their way through, discovering themselves, finding their way through difficult times. So I am so looking forward to reading this, and I will be very, very glad to give you my review of this when the time comes. And next is another book that was on last year's TBR and I didn't get round to reading, and it's called History by Miles Jupp. I had picked this up some time ago because, well, I quite like the title History, and Miles Jupp is, for those of you who don't know, he's an English actor and one-time stand-up comedian who often has a very kind of satirical, sardonic look on life. So I'm kind of looking forward to that sort of satire in this book too. And it's set in a private school where the main character is a teacher. The gentle country life Clive envisaged has stifled him and left his marriage on the brink. What he needs is a holiday, something to remind him and Helen what life used to be like. But when things don't go to plan and an incident at school begins to weigh heavy on his head, Clive's life starts to unravel in front of him. And goes on to say, history is a bittersweet tale of one man's attempts to keep it together in the face of his own attempts to mess everything up. The Independent says Jupp's witty novel has some telling things to say about British hypocrisy and the culture at independent schools, where students generally leave with an innate capacity to be dishonest. Yeah, that sounds like Miles Jupp. So that's going to be an interesting read. So I'm looking forward to that. Here's a book that is fascinating. Another one left by my mother, again set in the war. It's called Sweet Française by Irene Nemirovsky. Now, the actual writing of this novel and its later discovery is very, very fascinating and very, very sad, because she began writing this in 1941 to express the trials of living through the Nazi occupation. She died in 1942 in Auschwitz. 65 years later, the partly written work was discovered and has been translated and put together. So, as the Sunday Times said, the facts surrounding the discovery of this book are as remarkable as its contents are magnificent. So yeah, a real story around how this book came to be, to start with. It's set during the year that France fell to the Nazis. It falls into two parts. The first is a brilliant depiction of a group of Parisians as they flee the Nazi invasion. The second follows the inhabitants of a small rural community under occupation. So it's going to be quite harrowing. So, but at the same time, you know, it's one of those books that you feel you should read. And the Sunday Telegraph says, quite outstanding, full of beauty, pain and truth. So I think this is going to be quite an extraordinary book to read. So I am looking forward to giving you my review of this. I have never come across it before. Been sitting in my bookshelf for some time. And, you know, as I say, one of my mother's, typical one for my mother to have picked up. And yeah, that's going to be an interesting read. After that, again, we're sort of in June here with these books, and I'll probably have time to read an Agatha Christie. I don't know, is a murder mystery a bit of a light relief after the book I've just been talking about? Interesting question. But this one's been sitting around in my bookshelf for some time, and I thought, you know, I do love Agatha Christie, so I better get around and read it. It's by the pricking of my thumbs. Apparently not one of her most popular ones. I believe she wasn't that happy with it herself. So I'll be interested to see what I think. It's one of the Tommy and Tuppence ones. It's not Poirot or Miss Marple, although in the Miss Marple television series, they made this into a Miss Marple one. I remember, because I've seen this, and it's actually, I rather like the television one of this, but I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think Miss Marple is actually in the original book of this. And it's Tommy and Tuppence that are much older than the earlier Tommy and Tuppence books. And Tommy and Tuppence, of course, a married couple who occasionally did some sleuthing. Yeah. Looking forward to reading another Agatha Christie. Now, here is a definite summer read. Not one, again, I would have chosen. It's one of my mother's been sitting around in the bookshelf. It looks to me like a bit of chick lit. So I am not absolutely sure whether I will enjoy this. It not usually, as I say, the type of book I read. It's called Out of the Blue. It's by Belinda Jones. If I find I don't like it after the first couple of chapters, I will put it straight into the charity, the box for the charity shops, because, life is too short to read books you don't like. If I semi-like it, I will give a review and tell you what I think. But you never know. I might absolutely love it. So I'm always willing to give books a try that I wouldn't normally buy for myself. So there you are. And it's, let me tell you a bit about it. Selena Harper always thought she had the perfect job, working on a luxury cruise ship. She's whisked around the world from Alaska to Zanzibar, with excitement and adventure awaiting her in every port. But as she prepares for her latest shore leave and finds herself unexpectedly deserted by her newly engaged best friend, she begins to wonder if life on the ocean wave really is her dream come true. Why is she the only one who isn't settling down, and how can she be feeling homesick when she has no home? And of course, while she is on the island of Crete, she meets a man who she believes to be an incorrigible womanizer. Sounds a little bit predictable to me, but I am open to seeing whether it's good for me or not. So that's going to be interesting. But it's definitely a summer read for around about July. Now, if I don't like that one, I will be heading straight on to this one. And it's a book that I've been looking forward to reading for some time. And it's One Day by David Nicholls. I've heard quite a few of you say how brilliant this book is. So if you don't know it, here's the premise. You can live your whole life not realising that what you're looking for is right in front of you. 15th of July, 1988, Emma and Dexter meet on the night of their graduation. Tomorrow they must go their separate ways. So where will they be on this one day, next year and the year after that, and every year that follows? Obviously, a really good book to read in July. And the Daily Mirror said destined to be a modern classic, which I think that was definitely has come to pass. And the writer Marianne Keyes said it's incredibly moving. So although I'm not usually into romantic novels, this is one of those books that I know I'm probably going to really, really like very much. So, strange that I don't go much for romantic novels. I do quite like romantic films. Yeah, it's funny that. I don't know why, but there you have it. So anyway, I will look forward to having a go at that. Well into the second half of the year now, and looking at my bookshelf, I don't seem to have much lined up for August, so maybe that will be filled at some point by books I buy. But this book I've lined up for sort of late summer, September time is Good Behaviour by Molly Keane. First published in 1981. Most of Molly Keane's books seem to be much earlier, sort of 1930s, 40s, 50s. So this is a very late book for her. I don't know much about it. Again, I seem to be reading a lot of the books I'm going to be reading this year are ones I've kind of discovered that my mother had read. This just seems to be coming up a lot this year. Let me just read bits from the back. Behind the gates of Temple Alice, the aristocratic Anglo-Irish St. Charles family sinks into a state of decaying grace. To Irene St. Charles, large and unlovely daughter of the house, the fierce forces of sex, money, jealousy and love seem locked out by the ritual patterns of good behaviour. but crumbling codes of conduct cannot hope to save the members of the St. Charles family from their own unruly and inadmissible desires. This elegant and elusive novel, coming after years of silence, establishes Molly Keane as the natural successor to Jean Rhys. This looks fun, and I'm quite looking forward to reading this. Just have a look at some of the reviews. Malcolm Bradbury said, an extraordinary tour de force of fictional presentation, a masterpiece, a technically remarkable work as sharp as a blade. Molly Keane is a mistress of wicked comedy. Brilliant. Bookseller says, a witty black comedy of manners. Good Behaviour is a memorable novel by an Irish writer whose only equal is Elizabeth Bowen. There. So if you've read Elizabeth Bowen, you'd probably like this. So yeah, this sounds really interesting. Something I'm really looking forward to. Aha. Now, hopefully I will also be rereading one of the Harry Potter books, and it's going to be Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. I have been reading the Harry Potter books again, one by one, over a period of time. I remember when these books first came out, and the extraordinary how they just sort of took over and completely sold out, and the queues around along the street to get the books from the bookshops as soon as they were printed. It was just quite an extraordinary phenomenon. I was working as a lecturer in a college at the time, and I remember some of the staff sitting in the staff room reading them as well. So I thought, I've got to see what these were all about, and I really did enjoy them, and I have loved all the films as well, and I watch those from time to time. So it's, what can I say, you probably all know these series. The Goblet of Fire is the one with the Tri-Wizard tournament. Only wizards who are over 17 are allowed to enter. But that doesn't stop Harry dreaming that he will win the competition. And then at Halloween, when the Goblet of Fire makes its selection, Harry is amazed to find his name is one of those that the magical cup picks out. He will face death-defying tasks, dragons and dark wizards, but with the help of his best friends, Ron and Hermione, he might just make it through alive. So that's that one. I can't say much more about these. I'm sure you know, some of you may know more about them than I do. So I will just say I'm hoping to read that around about September. And next, I think soon after that will be my Halloween read for this year, and it's going to be The Terror by Dan Simmons. This is one of the books that I got in the subscription box that my niece bought me for Christmas a year ago. This looks both fascinating and terrifying, obviously, as the title suggests. I've mentioned this before when I unboxed it, and I know some of you have said, oh yes, you've read it, and it's really good. But for those of you who don't know, the premise is, as advanced an enterprise has ever set forth, Sir John Franklin's 1845 expedition in search of the fabled Northwest Passage had every expectation of triumph. But for almost 2 years, his ships Terror and Erebus have been trapped in the Arctic ice. Provisions are running low, yet the real threat isn't from the constantly shifting landscape, the flesh-numbing temperatures, or being crushed by the unyielding frozen ocean. No, the real threat is far more terrifying. There is something out there in the frigid darkness. It just sort of gives me goosebumps. The writer in The Guardian says, I emerged from the novel shivering, terrified and Arctic obsessed. I couldn't put it down. So yeah, I've been looking forward to reading this one for some time. So the terror. Definitely a Halloween novel for me. We're now down on the floor. This is the little bit of overspill as I don't have enough shelves for my TBR. And there we are. Now, so far, there haven't been many historical novels set before the 20th century. But here is one. It's called Plague Land by S.D. Sykes, and as the strapline says, as the Black Death ends, murder begins. It's basically a medieval whodunit. Who doesn't like a medieval whodunit? So it begins in 1350 in Kent. The Black Death has changed the land forever, taking master and servant alike. Young Oswald de Lacy was never meant to be Lord of Summershill Manor, but with his father and brothers killed by the plague, he must return from the monastery and take charge of the estate. Immediately, he is confronted with the vicious murder of a young woman, Alison Starvecrow. And the village priest claims it is the work of a demonic, dog-headed man. And Oswald knows this is nonsense, but to prove it, he must find the real killer. In a maze of political intrigue, family secrets and violent strife. Wow, that looks really exciting, doesn't it? I am really looking forward to that. I haven't read S.D. Sykes before, and looks like an author I'd be quite interested in getting into. She's a female. You can't tell from the initials. She lives in Kent with her family and various animals. Lovely. Yeah, definitely one I'm really looking forward to. Yes. Now, if I really hope that I can get round to reading this one this year. It's The House of Silk by Anthony Horowitz, and it's his take on Sherlock Holmes. Anthony Horowitz has written so many really good scripts. He's written many of the Midsummer Murders, for the brilliant Foyle's War, which I absolutely love, and some of the Poirot series, I believe. So he is very good at what he does, and I love Sherlock Holmes, so I am really looking forward to this one. Let's have a look. The game's afoot. It is November 1890 and London is gripped by a merciless winter. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson are enjoying tea by the fire when an agitated gentleman arrives unannounced at 221B Baker Street. He begs Holmes for help, telling the unnerving story of a scar-faced man with piercing eyes who has stalked him in recent weeks. Intrigued, Holmes and Watson find themselves swiftly drawn into a series of puzzling and sinister events stretching from the gaslit streets of London to the teeming criminal underworld of Boston and the mysterious House of Silk. Yes, that's one I am going to really enjoy. I just know it. So, sometime at the end of the year, folks. Now we're back up to here because I haven't reorganised them yet, and I think... So, I think in December, it's probably going to be a book by Gail Godwin called A Mother and Two Daughters. This is another one that I think was belonged to my mother. So I don't think I bought this. In fact, it's got my mother's writing in it. It was bought for her by my dad in 1988 in Stratford. Gosh. I don't know much about this book or Gail Godwin. I've heard of her. She's an American writer. The New York Times says there are so many things to talk about and praise in Gail Godwin's big new novel, the amazing vividness of its characters and the sense one gets that their lives are actually unfolding in the same world as yours. The Washington Post says it's a novel about the richest of all subjects, families, a novel of genuine consequence, a spacious and generous book into which Gail Godwin has entrusted worlds of feeling and understanding. I don't think I have read any of her books before, and it doesn't have a premise, so I know nothing about it apart from obviously it's about families, and I think I sort of skimmed through it to see what kind of setting it was. It seems to be set in winter, so that will be probably my end of the year book, but there may be others. Now that's just 18, so I think there will be more than that. I do have other bookshelves with hardbacks, and I've got some books lined up for rereading, one of which is Daphne du Maurier's House on the Strand, which I may get around to reading at some point this year, because I've talked about that a few times this year, and I thought I'd really like to read that again, because it's a time travel book, and that is something I'm kind of into at the moment. And also, if we look up here, these are some of the hardbacks. Which, the top two shelves, they're mostly larger hardbacks, and most of them are non-fiction. As you can see, there's a lot of sort of history books, but there are some novels there. So, well, I've got an autobiography of Richard E. Grant, which I'm hoping to get around to. Bright Day by J.B. Priestley. Again, he wrote plays about time, so that's really interesting. That's a non-fiction book about theatre, actually, which is really interesting. It's very old too. Monica Dickens' The Winds of Heaven. I couldn't remember whether I've actually read that, so I'm going to read that probably again. Oh yes, this is the Ian McEwan book I bought when I was at Hay on Wye, called Saturday, which I think is a bit of a thriller, so that's going to be interesting. I don't know whether I'll be reading that this year, but hopefully. The Search for Richard III, that'll be interesting. Oh yes, and I decided at some point I want to reread Wilkie Collins' Woman in White, because so many of you have said that's such a brilliant read, so I thought, I've read it before, but I'd really like to revisit that. So there we go. Obviously this is a hopeful book list for what I'm going to be reading this year. Of course, if I buy more books, there might be books slipped in there throughout the year that I haven't mentioned, and possibly not all of those books that I have mentioned will be read, but I hope that it's a little bit more accurate than last year's TBR was. So that should come out to around 20 or maybe more, who knows. Now I think after all that, we all need a bit of telly time, don't we? There she is. Come on. There you go. That's it. That was a bit of a marathon. I'm exhausted. Are you exhausted? No, not really. No, you're just waiting for your dinner. So there you go. That's my hopeful list of books for the coming year. A very exciting list. I hope you agree. Do let me know if you've read any of the books that I've mentioned. Do let me know what you have thought of them. Oh, have I sent you to sleep? If you haven't seen my list of books that I read throughout 2024, then I will put a link to that up here, so that you can have a look at that. Now, as I say, probably my next video will be my review of the book called Advent. I hopefully should have finished that by next week, but if not, I will probably think about doing one of the A to Z of authors from my bookshelf. So there'll be something next week. So until then, take care, be safe. Are you hiding or something? What is it? Tilly and I will see you very soon. Bye for now. You've gone all coy. What is it?